Hello, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Today I'm going to be sharing the very best powder bronzers for fair skin. So this video is obviously a little bit niche, but I have been trying a ton of new bronzers lately and over the past couple of years, to be honest, because as somebody who is very fair and who really doesn't mess with self-tanner or anything like that, I really just wanted to share my roundup of bronzers that work very well on my skin tone, that never pull orange, that aren't too pigmented, they're not too much, and have just the right undertones. So we do have quite a few to get into, and we are going to start with the drugstore and then we're going to end up in the luxury section. But let's hop right into it. So the very first one I pulled is from L'Oreal, and this is the Infallible 24-Hour Fresh Wear bronzer, and this is in the shade 200 Fair. Now I love this one because it is very buttery to the touch. When you swatch it out, it looks beautiful. It's like a very pigmented bronzer for fair skin. So it's not one that you've really got to work to build up that bronze. You will definitely get it with this, but this is nice because it is so incredibly blendable. If ever you get too much with this, it is so easy to blend and move around without disrupting the makeup underneath. It's just a very easy bronzer, and I love this so much. Like I said, it feels very buttery, but it's very blendable, and it lasts all day long, and it just looks so beautiful on the skin. And I do think this is just a very neutral toned bronzer. It's not too cool. It definitely isn't orange. And one thing I find with the drugstore is you can get some really incredible bronzers, but the shades really aren't going to have a lot of those undertones that maybe the higher end pricier bronzers do. And I think at the end of the day, that ends up being the big difference, is that the higher end brands will play with those undertones just a little bit more. It's not a bad thing, it's just something I've noticed. But I think this is a really beautiful one. Like I said, it's definitely very neutral. It's not too orange, it's not too cool, and it's just the most blendable bronzer I think at the drugstore. We do have a couple of really good ones, but I think this is probably easily the most blendable of all of them. Next, we have a bit of a throwback bronzer that I don't really hear anybody talk about anymore, but that is still a really good one. This is from Milani, and this is their Silky Matte Bronzer in the shade Sunlight. The shade of this one is very similar to the L'Oreal. You're going to notice that all of the drugstore options that I mentioned, the shades are very close. So this is also really lovely. It does feel quite silky to the touch, much like the name would suggest. It's not quite as buttery as the L'Oreal, and I would say this formula feels a little bit thinner. And I would also say that this one is slightly less pigmented. It's still very beautiful, easy to work with, blendable, but it is a little bit more on the buildable side than I would say the L'Oreal. And again, the tone of this one is perfect. It is definitely on the neutral side, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. This is one, like I said, that's been around for so long, and I do often forget about it in my drawer. And I feel bad about that because this is a really good bronzer. This is such a staple. If you are just looking to get into wearing bronzer, maybe you've never been a bronzer person, but you're kind of trying to get into it a little bit, I think this is a good option because it's not too pricey. It is from the drugstore, and it's got just the right amount of pigment, especially for somebody who is just starting to get into the product. I think it's such a fantastic formula. Next is definitely an old classic. This is my Physicians Formula Butter Bronzer. I have the shade Light Bronzer. The clasp on mine is actually broken, but I do think they've redone the packaging on some of these. So as you can see, I have pretty large pan in mine. This is, like the name would suggest, the butter bronzer, so it is incredibly buttery to the touch. Very blendable. I would say it feels a tiny bit less buttery than the L'Oreal, but that could be because I've had this one for so much longer. In terms of shade, I think this shade is even more fair than the Milani or the L'Oreal, and that's perfectly fine. I think this is a really good one. I think this was my, I don't know if this exact compact exactly, but this I think was my very first bronzer, because for the longest time I truly was not a bronzer person. Like I said, I'm very fair, so I used to be one of those people who was kind of afraid of bronzer. So I ended up starting with this, and because it's so light and buildable, it was just very easy to work with. It gave me such a great introduction to bronzer. I got to know the product, and then from there I was brave enough to try other ones. So I do love this one. I also think this is a fantastic first bronzer if that's what you're going for. I do think this is really great for that. The shade, like I said, it's a little bit lighter than the first two, but I do think it has a very slight yellow undertone. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't cause it to pull orange or anything like that, which I think at the end of the day is the main thing that we're going for. It's still a really great shade. It's still really flattering. It's still very beautiful. Now we're moving into Sephora brand. So this is from the Sephora collection. This is their matte bronzer. And I think this is pretty new. I think they had bronzers before, but I do think they reformulated them, did new packaging, and came out with these. First of all, I like the packaging on this because it's very sleek, but this bronzer is actually wonderful. So like I said, this is a matte bronzer. This is quite pigmented. It's kind of, I would say, the same pigment level as the L'Oreal, but again, it is so easy to blend and move around if you get too much. This is a lovely formula. It is very matte, so if you don't like any sort of glow, you won't be disappointed with this one. And I think this is one that almost looks a little bit more golden than some of the others, which is fine. I think that's actually really pretty, but this is yet another formula that is just very buildable, easy to work with. You can blend it out very easily if you get too much. This is a really nice one. I do think the Sephora collection has some really great products. I do tend to forget about them, which makes me feel really bad. This does have a strange fragrance to it that I can't quite place. I don't know that I love it, but at the end of the day, it's a really good product. The scent isn't that strong, but it's just a wonderful product and very easy to use, so I do love it. And of course, because it is the Sephora collection, the price point is quite fair as well. The next bronzer I have is from Fenty Beauty, and this is the Instant Warmth Bronzer in the shade Into Sun. So this one is incredible. The tone of this one is so beautiful. I would say this one pulls the coolest out of all of the ones that I have already mentioned, but this is amazing. But this one is interesting because it feels kind of dry to the swatch, but you can see it definitely has pigment to it. It's not super sheer, but again, it is a bit more of a buildable formula. It's incredibly easy to blend. It's just the most foolproof bronzer I have ever come across. I love this one so much. It's very neutral, but it does have a slight coolness to it, which I do like. It's not so cool that you're going to use it as a contour, but it is just that very perfect undertone for fair skin. I obviously love all of these bronzers I'm mentioning, but this is definitely one of my absolute favorites. This is also a matte bronzer. I noticed I definitely have a preference for matte bronzers. I just do. But if you're looking for an absolutely foolproof bronzer that's incredible for fair skin, that is just so easy to blend, has like just the right amount of pigment, not too much, not too little, just right in the middle, perfect. This is such a fabulous option. The next bronzer I have is from MAC, and this is their Sunstruck Matte Bronzer in the shade Light Rosy. So MAC does have a whole line of these. They have a radiant line and they have a matte line. I did go for the matte. However, I feel like while this is matte, there is still a slight radiance to it. It's not a flat matte like some of the others I've mentioned, and I think you'll be able to see what I mean in the swatch. Another thing I love about this one that you might be able to tell from the shade name is that it has a slightly rosier undertone. So for those of us with fair skin, we typically do have a cooler undertone. Maybe not always, but for the most part, we do have a cooler undertone. So that rosier undertone is going to be very, very flattering, and it's going to look a little bit more like a sun-kissed glow on the skin, like a really natural sun-kissed glow. And it's so beautiful. I absolutely love bronzers that have that rosy undertone, so I really do love this one. The only thing I don't necessarily love about this bronzer, even though it's everything that I love, it's buildable, it's blendable, it's got that rosy undertone, it is quite pigmented too. But the thing with this one that I've noticed is that you definitely want to blend it over a powdered face. I wouldn't just do your foundation and then this. For some reason, it can get a little bit patchy. So I do recommend foundation, powder, and then this, and it'll blend just fine and look stunning. And of course, that undertone, it's absolutely beautiful. So I truly do love these MAC bronzers, but I do just want to mention the little part about making sure your face is powdered. The next bronzer is one that I've been testing and trying recently, and this is from RMS Beauty. This is their Redimension Hydro Bronzer, and I have the shade Beach Walk Betty. So initially looking at this, you might be thinking that looks way too deep, way deeper than all the others. And in the swatch, you might still be thinking that. And I 100% agree, it definitely looks that way. This is also a glowier bronzer. But what's special about this is it, like the MAC, it does have that rosy undertone, even more so, I would say. But it does have that rosy undertone that is just so flattering on our skin. And while I do prefer more matte finish, because this does have a glow, it really does just look sun-kissed on the skin. It's just so beautiful and so flattering. I was so surprised when I got this. This is one that I just kept hearing people talk about over and over and over, and I thought there is no way it's that perfect for fair skin. It just looks way too deep. And then I was selling out everywhere, and I thought, okay, if it's that good, I have to try it. And it really is that good. It actually does look like a sun-kissed bronze. It's so beautiful. And it is pretty pigmented, but it's just so blendable, and it shears out beautifully. But if you get too much, it's okay. You can absolutely blend it out. It's just incredibly easy to work with and move around and sheer out. This is just a very, very easy bronzer to work with, and because of the shade, the undertone, and the radiance, it really does just look like you spent the day at the beach, and it's so beautiful. I do think this is fantastic. Next, I have one from Charlotte Tilbury, and this is the Airbrush Bronzer in the shade 1 Fair. So one thing I don't love about Charlotte Tilbury bronzers is her shade range is just not good. She usually has 4 shades of bronzer. So this is, like I said, in the shade 1 Fair. I do have pan in this one, so this is one that is definitely very well loved by me. This pan is, of course, massive. So to hit pan in this thing, there's still a ton of product left in here. This is one of those shades that does not swatch well whatsoever. It barely shows up in a swatch. And I found that on the skin as well. It's just one of those that you really have to build. It does build beautifully with a brush, not when you're trying to swatch it out. So while this does not swatch well, it is a very silky formula, so it blends out incredibly easily, but it is kind of nice to be able to add little bits at a time to end up customizing the pigment level and just really customize your bronze. So I do think this is a really, really great one for fair skin because it's never going to be too much. I would say it does lean on that slightly more yellow undertone side, but like I said, that's not a bad thing. It's not unflattering. It's a really pretty bronzer at the end of the day. So the next bronzer is from Pat McGrath, and this is the Skin Fetish Divine Bronzer. This is in the shade Naked Desire. So unlike Charlotte Tilbury, Pat McGrath has an amazing shade range. You will be able to find a bronzer shade that is perfect for you. This shade here, Naked Desire, is for the fairest of the fair. This is another one, much like the Charlotte Tilbury, that doesn't swatch well, but you really do get to build it up and sort of customize the pigment level. It does have that slightly more yellow leaning undertone, but again, it's not unflattering. This one is just very, very easy to work with. When you kind of swatch it, it does also feel quite dry, but applying to the skin is so easy. It's so easy to blend. Like a lot of these, they're just blendable, buildable, beautiful on the skin. I really do like this one. I think it's wonderful. I know Pat McGrath is super pricey, but this is one where she does 30% off sales so often, so you can totally get this for a fair price, but this is a really, really nice one as well. Now, we're gonna finish off with 2 pretty expensive bronzers. The first one is another one I've been testing recently, kind of swapping days with the RMS. This is the YSL All Hours Hyper Bronze, and I have shade 1. So this packaging is some of my very, very favorite packaging. It's very beautiful. On the inside, the embossment on the powder is also beautiful. This is another one that feels incredibly buttery to the touch. It looks like a lot of the other shades I have, so do you absolutely have to buy this one? Absolutely not. I just really wanted this because I really love YSL, the packaging, the embossment in the powder, all of that just kind of lured me in, and I think it's stunning. But this is another one that you get a lot of product in here, so it's going to last you a really long time. Another one that's just blendable, very buildable. This does go on quite sheer, and I do find that I need to build it, which again I love, and the shade is just fantastic. It's so easy. When I would say that in the winter when I'm kind of even more fair than I am right now, I would definitely go in with this one every single day. I love that YSL bronzer for just how buttery it is and blendable. I love it. And finally, we have the bougiest bronzer I have, and this is from Gucci. So this is their bronzing powder in the shade 01. So I did pick this up during a recent sale where it was somehow half price at Sephora, and this is so good. Much like the RMS, this one looks way too deep in a swatch, but on the face, that is not the case. And also, this is another one that does have that more rosy undertone that is just so flattering. I love that sun-kissed glow it gives to the skin. However, this one is quite matte, unlike the RMS. So if you want that rosier undertone, but you do not want any sort of glow, this is a really nice one. This does have a fragrance to it, and it is pretty strong. So just keep that in mind if you don't like a fragrance, but I do really love this one. The packaging on this one is also unmatched, and then you do get like a little dust bag with it. It's beautiful. But again, this is another one that just blends like an absolute dream. It is a little bit more pigmented than some of the others, but like I said, it blends like a dream. It gives you that sun-kissed glow with that beautiful rosy undertone. I love it so much. Really quickly, I just wanted to show you a swatch of every single one of these shades side by side. I'll start left to right. We have the L'Oreal bronzer, then we have the Milani. So next to the L'Oreal, the Milani is definitely looking quite a bit cooler. Then we have the Physicians Formula, then we have the Sephora brand, then we have the Fenty, then we have MAC, RMS, Charlotte Tilbury, Pat McGrath, YSL, and Gucci. So some of these definitely look a little bit on the deeper side, but that's usually the ones that have that rosier undertone, and they still end up being so beautiful and flattering and never too much on fair skin. So like I said, these are all of my favorite bronzers for fair skin. These are just the very best. I do have some cream bronzers that I like for fair skin, but these are really just the very best. Let me know down below if you have any questions. Maybe I didn't quite answer. Do you have any thoughts? What's your favorite bronzer? If you have fair skin like I do, let me know all of your thoughts down below. I love hearing from you guys so much. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. I do upload new videos every single week. Thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!